99% Geek. My name is Andrew Gatesy, and I'm a writer. I have always wanted to write for television. Unfortunately, it's a really hard industry to break into, and I was wasting a lot of time writing scripts that no one ever got to read, really. I'd submit them to contests, and they'd get like 8th out of 750 or whatever, 10th out of 1,000, things like that. And it's like, great, I'm placing, but I'm not winning any money, I'm not making anything, I'm putting all this time in for nothing. So I started writing books on Amazon. The book I'll be reading today is the first book I wrote right out of university, so it's a little rough. I apologize. Try not to judge me too much for the way these early stories are going to be. Basically, I'm writing books as if they were TV shows. I write each chapter like it's an episode, and then I release it on my Patreon. I release one chapter a month. And I have multiple books that I'm working on at once, and some of them connect with each other. There's interconnecting universes and things like that. So it's a whole sort of series thing going on that I've got going on. I'd call it 99% Geek. That's my brand, I guess. And so you can subscribe on my Patreon and get access to all my content, my first book, and then the 5 books that make up what I call 99 Geeks Season 1. They're all currently in Act 2. Act 1 is on Amazon. Once the books are complete, I release them on Amazon like DVD box sets. So I released Act 1 of each of the books as Volume 1 sets. And now we're into Act 2. But today I will be starting all the way back in Season 0 with A Suburban Fantasy. It's a story about a teenage girl that gets turned into a vampire against her will. And by this real creepy serial-killing vampire type. And she has to, with the help of her friends, she has to find a way to be stronger than all his previous victims and find a way to stop him from killing again. Find a way to live with what she's become, the monster she's become, and her friends help her find her humanity. So that's the adventure we're going to go on. And it begins now with the prologue called FlashDance of the Lily. It was not a dark and stormy night, but with the way her night had been going, it really should have been. "I've made a mistake," Lily said into a payphone cradled gingerly against her shoulder. Her hand massaged her forehead in a wasted attempt to keep her headache at bay as she continued to explain. It was a big mistake. Surely there was a better word. Catastrophe? She didn't know what to say. She'd been running for days now, hiding out in the dark alleys of Detroit during the nights and the sewers while the sun was up. The only thing she knew of that smelled worse than those places now was her. "I'm not giving this mistake enough credit," she said with a snort under her breath. "It was the biggest mistake of my life, Mom. It was also my last." She muttered in realization. Her eyes darted over the surrounding crowd, nervously watching out for any sign of trouble. She was as wound up as a squirrel, but not without good reason. He was here. She could see his silhouette on the roof of a building across from her, damp alley, the entrance of which she'd found the payphone. He was watching her, could see her clear as day in the blue illumination of the booth. It was a booth surrounded by people, and she should have been hidden there amongst the never-ending bustle that made up the bars and nightlife of 1985 Detroit. But still, he picked her out. He always picked her out. "Don't come looking for me, Ma, and tell Tim to move on. I never want to see him again. Tell him that." She shook her head in an attempt to cover her face with her long blonde hair. It was a futile gesture. The figure had already spotted her. "It was nice having this talk with you, our last one," she said with a slight smile. She was crying and smiling at the same time. Was that possible? She waited on the line, though for what she didn't know. Maybe just to listen to the silence through the phone. "This tape has reached its end," said a mechanized voice. "To continue recording, please turn the tape over and hit record." There was a beep, and she hung up. Beep! Unlike how it might have appeared, she just had one of her best mother-daughter conversations in years. It was her fault they didn't get along. She'd been a difficult teen, never around and yet always a topic of dinner conversation. Eventually, she just stopped showing up to the family dinners. She'd have gone to those dinners now, had she been given the chance at least one more time. She wanted nothing more than to sit with her family again, for there was no open seat at any dining table in the world that would accept her after what she'd done. With a sigh, she stepped out onto the loud and crowded sidewalk. Lily hadn't seen the time in a while, but she assumed it was likely well past midnight. Let him come. She was ready for him. Let him come and take from her everything else that mattered. Let him have it all. She was ready to die. She even knew what her last words were going to be. She was going to tell him finally how she really felt. Her eyes scanned the rooftops again, but he'd already moved on. He could have been on her at any second. She could have very well been moments from death. That minute might just have been the last minute of her life. Just that thought alone made her feel sick. It made her think of all the things she still wanted to do, all the friends she could have made, all the love she had to give, all the songs Freddie Mercury still had to write, songs she'd never hear. Suddenly she didn't want to die. Suddenly she was second-guessing herself. Again. Damn it. She still couldn't see him in the crowd, but she knew which direction he'd be coming from. Turning away from where she saw him last, Lily lost herself in the mass of people. It never failed to astonish her how blind people could be to their surroundings when they were having fun. No one was paying any mind to Lily as she was frantically working her way down the busy sidewalk. No one even spared her a second glance, even with the blood. Lily had been just like them once. She'd spent countless Friday nights in her youth among crowds just like these. She'd had the best circle of friends anyone could ask for, and a beautiful golden retriever that looked a little too much like her and brought the envy of every other kid on the street. She never really appreciated her friends, her dog, or her life until they were all gone. That life had been hers only last week. She'd had to give it all up, a move she was regretting with every remaining beat of her heart. Pushing through the streets past faceless strangers and voiceless conversations, she would have done anything to see her family again, but she had nothing to say for herself. What would be the point? She'd only be putting them in danger. Throughout the vibrant crowd of neon blues and greens, she saw an image to give her pause. The dark figure in black, standing in contrast of the world, alone in a sea of hundreds. He'd found her. She'd have to keep moving and stay where she could be seen. That was the key. "Hey," said a male voice from the crowd. "Are you all right?" Someone had actually noticed her, much to her surprise. It wasn't anyone she knew. He was a young man with greased black hair, large tinted glasses, and bell-bottoms. Who still wore bell-bottoms in the 80s? "I'm fine," she told him as she turned her back. She knew why he'd stopped her, but there was nothing he could do. It wasn't her blood, after all. Breaking into a run, she squeezed through and around people, trying to get as far from the dark figure as she could. She barreled into a large bouncer outside a club, knocking the 300-pound black man to the floor. She didn't even try to apologize, his face frozen in surprise that one so small had walked through him so easily. She had nothing to do but keep running. The whole world was against her now. She had nowhere to run to and no one left to trust. She couldn't surround herself with people, but without witnesses. A strong arm grabbed hers and pulled her into a nearby alley. It was the dark figure. He was so dark, in fact, that he seemed to be nothing more than a shadow, except for his teeth, shining pearl white in the moonlight, particularly his fangs. "I find it curious that you keep running from me," he said with a voice like sandpaper. Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted so bad to make the past week go away. Why couldn't all this have been a big scary dream? "I had an understanding this was what you wanted." "Go to hell," she told him. The light from the edge of the alley reflected in a tear that rolled slowly down the shadow's invisible face. He leaned in close and whispered to her, "I loved you so much." He paused to breathe. "But I guess you're just like all the others." There was a flash of movement and what looked like a wooden stake in his hand. He slammed it into her chest. The piercing pain shot through her like electricity, sending spasms through her limbs and widening her eyes in shock. She could feel the life slipping from her as a dark figure reached out and held her close. "I'm sorry," he apologized to her. I really thought things could have worked between us. She tried to breathe, but couldn't. She didn't have the strength to draw a breath, nor move or scream out. Her vision was swimming, and her life was flashing before her eyes. It was less impressive the second time. You must have known this was coming. If I know you, he said with a sad chuckle. You've been planning your last words for a while now. Can I hear them? There were no words to fully describe how she felt. Maybe a really hateful short story or a long poem. However, she'd been saving something. It was a sentence that really summed up their short-lived psychotic relationship. What was it again? Oh, right. Eckhart, she said in a hoarse whisper, speaking the figure's name so that there could be no confusion who her next words would be referring to. You're a true-to-life mother... Chapter 1. That's not my name. Will be the next chapter. I don't believe I have any viewers. No, I don't. So I won't be disappointing anyone to stop right there. That has been the first audiobook that I will be doing in a long series. Will probably always be behind the current Patreon chapter. But, so if you ever feel like you enjoyed this and wanted to hear more, you could always go to patreon.com/99geek. And subscribe there for just $1, and you get access to the entire library. At this point, that's over 1,000 pages of content. I'm not kidding, over 1,000. I think I'm nearing almost 1,500 at this point. So get in on that. You can also follow me at Andrew Getsy. That's G as in George, ECZY. I think you know how to spell Andrew. On top of that, other places you can get me, you can go to 99geek.ca. Just follow me there. That's got links to everything I've been talking about. I have a blog. It has a link there to the blog. I think to tell you the URL of just the blog would be way too much work. So just 99geek.ca. Check out all that stuff. The blog contains a weekly newsletter I release about geeky content. And it also has excerpts, free excerpts of each chapter that I release on my Patreon. So you can look forward to that. The chapter I'll be releasing this month on my Patreon is about a journalist who goes to Iraq in search of a story to cement her career. But what she finds is a lot more dangerous than what she was expecting. So look forward to that. That's coming to my Patreon at the end of the month. And possibly I will continue with the next chapter of this book next week. Until then, peace out, and may the force be with you. That's probably copyrighted. Is that copyrighted? I probably shouldn't say that.